Hello everyone, I'm Lori with Behavior Education at Spirit Keeper Animal Sanctuary. Today is Monday, January 6, 2025. This webinar is being sponsored by the New Ball Python Keepers Group and the BOA Imperator Beyond the Obsession Group. Thanks to Tay and Kate for setting this up. This is going to be about how to get started with target training your snake. What you're going to learn is what target training is, the purpose of target training, how to prepare for target training your snake, and how to start teaching your snake to target. Target training means that you're teaching your animal, in this case your snake, to interact with the target in some way. Usually it's to touch a target with a part of their body, but it could also be to move to the location of a target or follow the target or hold in position or pause at a target. The purpose of target training might be simply to communicate with your snake, and that might be to let your snake know what's about to happen, which is an example of classical conditioning, or to ask your snake to do something like just simply from moving from one location to another, which is an example of operant conditioning. So you might want to let your snake know that you're going to feed them, that you're going to open their door, that you're going to intrude into their habitat with your hands. You might want to let them know you're going to touch them, that you're going to pick them up, or you might want to give them a cue. That means they're free to come out and roam around and do as they please. And that is using the target to tell them something specific, and you would use a separate target to mean each one of these different things. And you're just letting them know, hey, the door's open, you can come out if you want. Hey, I'm going to feed you. It's like telling them something so they know what's about to happen. But you can also use target training to let your snake know that they have the opportunity to earn reinforcement contingent upon doing a behavior first. So in other words, that they have the opportunity to do some work in order to earn a paycheck. So how do you prepare to target train your snake? Well, first you have to choose a training target, choose a type of reinforcer, determine what your goal or goals are for you and your snake, set up a safe and relevant environment, and then create a training plan or a shaping plan. First, you're going to choose a target, and a target can be of one of several types. It can be a visual target, and that's what you see here. It can be an auditory target or a tactile target or an olfactory target, meaning the target could be something that your snake can see, something they can hear, they can smell, they can taste, or that they can sense in some other way. I use a lot of visual targets for my snakes, and we're going to go over that now. So you want to determine what shape, color, size, and style, and what type of material is going to be suitable for you and your snake. Let's talk about each one of these things briefly. You want the target to be safe. It shouldn't have any sharp edges. It shouldn't be pointy. It shouldn't be something your snake could eat or that's toxic. It shouldn't be something your snake could get their teeth caught on if they bite it. It shouldn't be something small enough that they could swallow if they bite it. So it needs to be safe for your snake to work around and for you to work around. It needs to be perceptible. So your snake needs to be able to perceive that target, whether that's see it, hear it, feel it, smell it, sense it. In the case of these targets, these are visual targets, so they need to be able to see it. It needs to be perceptible from the rest of the things in the environment, which means it needs to be a color they can perceive, or it needs to be contrasting enough with other things in their field of view that it really stands out to them. So if you look at these different targets here, and look at the set at the lower middle, there's a yellow one, a red one, and a white one. That white one to me is barely perceptible against this white background. That wouldn't really stand out to me if you were using it as a signal for me. Now, the yellow and red ones stand out really well to me. Boy, I can really see that bright yellow and that bright red, but I am an animal that can see, can perceive red and yellow. The best that we know, snakes can likely perceive blues and greens. They can't see red and yellow. So what that red, yellow, and white target might look like to them, or to some animal that doesn't see colors, might be something like this. So they just look like shades of gray, and they don't really contrast from each other very well. So when you're choosing a target, you want to make sure that that target is either a color they can easily see, or that really contrasts with the background environment, is going to stand out because you're wanting to signal them with that target. Now, you may have to test this out and just play with it a little bit and see which colors or which specific targets your snake really seems to pay attention to. Most of my pythons really seem to pay close attention to this bright royal blue color, and so I use that a lot. Whether they literally see that as blue like we do or not, I don't know, but I know that they really notice it when they see that in contrast to everything else in their environment. You want to use a target that is manageable for you, meaning it's not too heavy for you, it's not too big for you, it's not too small, that the handle is the correct length. If you're going to be using the target disc or the target ball or the target buoy to set food on and leave in your snake's enclosure, or that you're going to want to position that target somewhere for the snake to move to without you holding it on a handle, you might want to consider a removable handle for your target, or having two identical targets, one that's on a stick and one that's not on a stick. You just need to make sure it's something you can easily manage as you're interacting with your snake and you're conducting the training session. You also want to make sure that that target is something that you can clean and disinfect without damaging it or without discoloring it. Next, you're going to want to choose a reinforcer. I typically choose primary reinforcers for target training. A primary reinforcer is something that is inherently rewarding or satisfying to the learner, and you don't have to condition it. They don't have to learn to like it. It's something they automatically like. It's typically linked to basic survival needs and instincts. So it makes it naturally motivating for the animal. So the snake is going to be naturally keen on acquiring that reinforcer because it's something they're naturally attracted to or that naturally benefits them. It's naturally motivating for them to want to have. It's usually got some kind of biological significance to fulfill some fundamental needs like food, water, shelter, sleep, sex, comfort, or freedom and control. I use a lot of food when I first start target training the snakes, but that doesn't mean that down the road I don't use other things. I also have used things like freedom, control over their environment, warmth, water, but when I start out, I typically use food as the primary reinforcer. Next, you need to determine why you personally are target training your snake. Are you doing it because you want to have fun, because it's a challenge for you, or you want to create challenging experiences for your snake? Is there a practical use for it? That's why I started target training. I use it to move the snakes from one location to another, to ask them to come out of hiding, to ask them to come to me if they're out free roaming, to ask them to exit a carrier or exit their enclosure and shift into temporary holding so I can clean their enclosure without stressing them. I ask them to shift onto scales or stations. You might use it solely for communication, to tell your snake, I'm going to feed you, I'm going to hold you, I'm going to touch you, I'm going to pick you up, I'm about to open the door, I'm about to stick my hands in your enclosure. You can use it for enrichment. You can use it to encourage your snake to engage in physical exercise, or there are other reasons why you might use it. Let's take a look at a snake doing an early stage of target training right now. This is a moon. And you see that he's orienting towards the target and he's moving in its direction. He got very excited about that. And then I deliver reinforcement. And at this stage in his training, I could just leave it as it is and use it as a signal for eating. Or I could now shape this behavior further and further until he's maybe exiting his enclosure, until he's calmed down about it a little bit and he can pause at that target, or he can come out of hiding, or he could station on a scale or get into a carrier. But the stage that you saw right here, and let's look at that again, it's dawned on him the target means food, he's excited about it, he's moving towards it, and he's expecting that reinforcement. And so now is the point in time when I need to determine, again, am I going to just leave it at this, or am I going to teach him to do more and more using that target. All right, then you want to set up a safe and relevant environment. A safe environment should be common sense, an environment that is not going to harm you or your snake, and that your snake feels safe and comfortable in, and that you feel safe and comfortable in. It also needs to be relevant to the snake. It needs to be meaningful to them in some way. You wouldn't take a fully aquatic water snake and train it in an arboreal environment or even in a terrestrial environment. It needs to have some kind of relevance to their natural biology and species natural history. So the training environment, at least in the beginning, should be a place that's familiar, it should be comfortable, and it should be meaningful to your snake. In other words, it should be in line with their species natural history and biology, as well as their individual preferences. What does your individual snake like to do? What do they prefer? What textures do they prefer interacting with? What environments do they prefer to be in? What furnishings do they prefer to use? So, are you going to start target training in the very beginning, in or out of your snake's enclosure, or a combination of both? Some snakes are very comfortable doing both. Some are going to be more comfortable training in or out of their enclosure. You're going to have to determine that. Are you going to train in a terrestrial, arboreal, fossorial setup, a water setup, a combination? It's going to depend on your individual learner. What's the temperature and lighting going to be like? What substrates or textures are going to be in the training environment? If you're going to use stations or some kind of furniture for the snake to interact with, it needs to be relevant to them and meaningful and attractive to them to interact with. So if you look at this photo in the upper right, you can see this is Hera, one of my Bredl's pythons at the vet. They have two scales at the vet. They have this flat baby scale, which you see in the back, with a textured surface. And then they have this other scale with an arboreal perch on it. Bredl's pythons are semi-arboreal. She was very comfortable to shift onto that perch scale and be weighed and hang out there. Her sitting on a flat surface on that flat scale is going to be meaningless, and I guarantee she would have just tried to crawl off and flee somewhere. But my hognose snake, on the other hand, when she went to the vet, this arboreal perch scale is going to be meaningless to her. She's not going to coil around an arboreal perch to get weighed. She was perfectly comfortable sitting on that textured, grippy surface on that flat scale. So these are things you want to keep in mind when you're training. You also want to keep in mind the time of day or night that you're going to train. So in the beginning, you want to train when your snake is naturally awake and active, and it makes sense for them to be hunting, to be engaging in resource seeking. Now down the road, you want to help your snake learn to generalize the training, generalize the targeting behavior, generalize any stationing behaviors to different circumstances, different environments, contexts, situations, and different times of the day and night for emergencies or for when they have to go to the vet or do different things. But in the very beginning, you want them to feel safe and comfortable, and you want them to learn in an environment that is going to be the best learning environment possible in the beginning. As they become more advanced learners, then you can make things more challenging by adding changes to the environment, changes to the time of day or night, changes to the location and context, and you can add in distractions. You want to create a training plan. You have to have a plan, a shaping plan or a training plan, where you define your target behavior. You're going to have an overall goal behavior, and then you're going to have a target behavior for each individual training session that over time is going to get you to that overarching goal behavior. So you have to research your species and observe and assess the individual learner you're working with and preference test as needed. What are their favorite reinforcers? What are their favorite textures and furnishings? When is their favorite or best ideal time to work? Then you're going to have to list out what equipment you're going to need on your plan. What target are you going to use? What reinforcer are you going to use? How are you going to deliver that reinforcer? Are you going to drop feed on the target, or are you going to tong feed? In which case you're going to need tongs as equipment. Any furnishings you need in your environment, like scales or stations, if you're going to incorporate that. Anything else that you need, you want to list that on your training plan under equipment needs. And then you're going to identify the starting behavior and break down subsequent steps or successive approximations to get you to that ultimate goal behavior. So if my ultimate goal behavior for my snake is to get them to shift out of their primary habitat and onto a scale, I'm going to mark down where they're starting at. They are starting at, they know 0. And they're going to get to shifting out of their habitat and stationing on a scale. So in between 0, I know nothing, and I know how to shift out of my habitat and follow a target onto a scale and wait there. There are a bunch of baby steps that the snake is going to have to learn in between, and those are the approximations. We're going to talk more about that. You're going to need to be flexible and adjust your criteria as needed. Some snakes are going to move between those steps really quickly. Some are going to move between those steps really slowly. And sometimes you're going to have to go back and reassess your steps. So you're going to also want to track your progress so that you not only know where you started, but where you are and if you need to make any adjustments. On the right here, you see some sample training plans that I just pulled offline. We're going to talk about some specific ones, but this one at the top just says training steps in your plan. The goal, touching a target with his nose. Steps, looking at the target is step 1. Step 2 is approaching the target. Step 3 is touching the target for less than 1 second. Step 4 is building duration of touching the target 1 to 3 seconds. Then touching the target for 3 to 5 seconds. Then touching the target for 5 to 7 seconds. Each one of these steps could be a different training session. And it could take one snake or one horse or one dog just, one day or week or one training session and move to the next step. But it might take others days or weeks or more than one training session. It depends on your individual. Moving on, touching the target when it's on the ground. That's another step. Then touching the target when it's held up high. Following a moving target for 5 centimeters. And then use your imagination and add in more steps. So you don't know how quickly your learner is going to progress. Maybe your learner progresses from looking at the target to approaching the target and following at 5 centimeters within one training session. And maybe by the next training session, they're following the target 10 centimeters and then 15 and then 20. Maybe your learner gets stuck on one step for a long time. You just don't know. Some learners learn quickly and move through these fast, and some don't. This training plan sample, by the way, was for a horse, and I thought it was interesting because it could be applied to a snake very easily. The shaping plan at the bottom is a blank one. Let's take a look at what that looks like now. So the one on the right is a blank shaping plan, and you could do this on a blank piece of paper. You write your goal behavior down. Then you're going to write, what does that look like? You describe what your goal behavior looks like. And then under skill check for this particular training plan, you're going to write what behaviors are needed in order to reach that goal behavior. The snake needs to be able to look at a target. The snake needs to be able to move to a target. The snake needs to be able to follow a moving target. The snake needs to be able to turn left or right following that target. The snake needs to follow that target up and out the door. The snake needs to follow that target onto a station. And the snake needs to wait at that target. So those would be steps that your snake would need to learn. And those would all be listed under the step-by-step approximations. And each one of those approximations would be reinforced. And that is not all going to be in one training session. That's going to be over a period of time of weeks or months or years, depending on how quick your learner is. Now, if you look at the training plan on the left, it's a little bit more specific. This one is for a dog. It says the target behavior is to stay. And the current level of the dog's ability when they made this training plan said the dog could stay for 30 seconds with the handler 3 feet away and no distractions in the living room. So in session 1, they did the training session in the living room with no distractions. They expected the dog to stay for 20 seconds with the handler 4 feet away. They reinforced the dog every time it did that. And on the notes here, it says the dog did very well. Then in training session 2, they expected the dog to stay for 20 seconds with the handler 5 feet away and no distractions. And the notes say that the dog had difficulty with this, it broke the stay, it couldn't do it. So that tells you that it did okay with the handler 4 feet away, but not at 5 feet away. So you go back then during the next training session, you reinforce the 4 feet away, and then maybe you go 4¼ feet away or 4½ feet away and see if the dog can be successful there. You're going to have to do the same thing with your snake. Maybe the snake is really good at looking at the target and it'll look at it left or right or up or down, but it just isn't moving its body towards the target. And so maybe you're holding the target too far away and you need to move it closer. And maybe you need to reinforce just stretching the neck towards the target. And then the next time, ask if the snake will move a couple of centimeters towards the target. But maybe on the other hand, you have a snake that sees that target and man, it just moves to it immediately. Well, then, maybe next time you need to move it further away. So you're going to have to base your approximations, your steps on your learner. All right, here is a sample of what session 1 might look like. The snake is awake, alert, and it's a confident snake. That means it's out and about and not hiding, and it's willing to take food from tongs. For a shy snake, there's a different protocol. So the snake's awake and alert. You're going to get your target, your reinforcer, your tongs if needed, and you're going to have your plan. You're going to pair the target directly with food. That's always step 1. Approximation number 1 is to pair the target with food. So you present the food and the target to the snake where it can see it, close enough that the snake can grab the food without having to move too far. And you wait for the snake to approach and take the food, and that's the end of the repetition. And then you can repeat that, or you can end the session and then start a new session the next time you feed the snake. Here is a sample of what session 2 may look like if you feel like you don't need to keep pairing the target with food. You might have to pair the target with food 2 or 3 sessions, depending on the learner. But when the snake is ready for step 2, this is what step 2 looks like. The snake is awake, alert, and confident. You get your target, your reinforcer, and you have your plan. Now you're presenting or showing just the target to the snake with no food. And at the very first slightest indication that the snake acknowledges that that target's there and they know that it means something, and then you're going to deliver the reinforcer. So the snake might look at the target, orient towards it, tongue flick at it. As soon as you show that target with no food and they acknowledge it in some way, there is some deliberate acknowledgement of it, you're going to deliver the reinforcement. You're going to wait for the snake to take the food, and then you're going to end that repetition and you can repeat it, or you can just end the session and repeat that next session. Let's take a look at what this looks like in the video. So the snake's awake and alert. The snake orients to the target. I deliver the reinforcement. The snake takes the reinforcer and we end the session. Let's take a look at that again. So again, the snake is awake and alert. It sees the target, it orients towards the target. I deliver reinforcement, and that repetition or that session is finished. So this is step 2. So those were the first 2 approximations, or first 2 steps for target training. Whether those are done all in one session or in 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 17 sessions depends on your learner. Those are always going to be the first 2 steps. Pair the target with food, and then show the target and reinforce the slightest acknowledgement of the target. Okay, so pair the target with food, then present just the target, and then deliver food a few seconds later. These are the same whether you are using the target training as a communication tool or you want to teach more behaviors, cooperative care behaviors down the road. But at this stage, this is just classical conditioning. The target means food. So in classical conditioning, the snake or other animal doesn't have to do anything to earn the reward. Their behavior doesn't matter. Stimulus A predicts stimulus B. So that just means that A is telling the snake B is going to happen. It doesn't matter what they do, the food is coming. And so if you look at my diagram here, number 1 is the unconditioned stimulus. That is the primary reinforcer, the food. The snake automatically knows how to hunt when it sees food. It automatically hunts that and eats it. Square 2 shows the target. That's a neutral stimulus now because it doesn't have any meaning to the snake. So you show the target and the snake just sits there. It has no response to it. Or in some cases, the snake could be afraid of it. Or in some cases, if you have a particularly neophilic snake, a snake that's really curious about new things, it might just interact with it automatically, but it's not going to know why. Okay. In number 3 now, you're taking that unconditioned stimulus, which is the food, and you're pairing it with that neutral stimulus, which is the target, and you're doing that repeatedly until in square 4, the target starts to mean food to the snake. So basically what you have just done is taught that snake every time you see this target, it means food's going to appear. You don't have to do anything for it. Your behavior doesn't matter. It just means I'm telling you food's coming. I'm calling you into dinner. I'm ringing the dinner bell. Okay, that's classical conditioning. So now you have a decision to make. You can stop here and use the target only to communicate to the snake that you're going to feed it. That's it. For the whole rest of your relationship, the rest of your life, you can just use that target as a tool that means I'm feeding you. Or you can move on and teach the snake that the target no longer predicts food, but now the target signals an opportunity to earn reinforcement contingent upon doing something else first. So before, the snake didn't have to do anything. You were just letting the snake know that you were going to feed it. And the snake's behavior didn't matter. They were getting the food. You're just giving it a heads up. Hey, I'm telling you I'm going to feed you. That's classical conditioning. But now, if you want to do more and you want to teach your snake to do more, now you have to teach the snake that the delivery of the food is contingent upon the snake doing some other behavior first. That's operant conditioning, operating on the environment in order to gain benefit. So now they're having to work for the food. So no longer does the target just predict food. Now the target means, hey, you have to do something first. And once you do that thing, now you can have food. So now the snake is earning that reinforcement. And it does mean that their behavior matters now. So before, their behavior didn't matter. I'm just feeding you and I'm telling you I'm going to feed you. But now your behavior matters because you have to earn the food by behaving in a certain way. So here is an example of the target signaling food, and that's it, nothing more. So I'm showing the target, it signals that food's coming, the food comes, she takes the food and eats it. We could spend the whole rest of our relationship just like this. You know, I had the door open, I changed the water, I spot cleaned. She didn't think anything of it, but as soon as she saw the target, she knew food was coming. Now let's talk about an example where the target is asking the snake to perform a specific behavior. So now the snake's not automatically going to just get food because the target's there. Now the snake has to do something first. So in this example, and this is a very complex example, that the snake learned by being reinforced through successive approximations over time, that the snake has to orient towards the target, move out of its enclosure towards the target, follow a moving target, and position its body on a specific way on this station. So it is having to delay reinforcement for a specific amount of time, be patient, have impulse control, and maintain engagement with that target long enough to follow it out of its enclosure and wrap its very long body 100% around this station, so it's completely out of its enclosure and on this mobile station that I can now move onto a scale, move onto a table, move to another room, move into a carrier, take somewhere else. Okay, that's operant conditioning. There were a lot of things that that snake had to do first, and then it had to pause at that target and wait for the reinforcer or the food to be delivered. So that's the difference between classical conditioning as, hey, I'm just telling you I'm going to feed you, here's your food, versus you've got to work for a paycheck. Now, I mentioned that we were going to discuss what to do if you had a shy snake. So if the snake hides, it won't take food from tongs or avoids your presence completely, you can make the snake aware that something is happening outside of the hide by using a scent, a flashlight, a vibration or noise of some sort to get its attention. And if it's curious enough to look outside of the hide, or it smells something intriguing, even a whiff of the prey, then it might emerge from the hide entrance and you can go ahead and proceed with target training there. But if it's too fearful to do that, you can just alert the snake that something's going on outside. You can set the target down outside of the hide entrance, leave the food on the target, and then you can step away or you can leave completely. Now you can place the target down in the enclosure and wait for the snake to acknowledge it and then deliver the reinforcement on the target. That's if the snake's not afraid of you, but maybe it just isn't used to taking it off tongs. So you just set the target down and put the food on it. And then if the snake's completely afraid of you even being nearby or eating in your presence, you can drop feed on the target, leave the target and the food in the enclosure and leave the room. And those are just the first steps to target training a shy snake or a snake that tends to hide. And then once they're at least taking the prey or the reinforcer off the target, whether you're there or not, then you can work on shaping further behaviors. And I have whole videos about how to do this. And this is a demonstration playlist that I have on my YouTube channel of really short, like 1 to 4 minute demonstrations of target training, some of which is classical conditioning and some of which is operant conditioning. But at this point is the time when you need to decide what you want to use your target training for. And are you going to use it just as a communication signal to signal, I'm going to feed you, I'm going to touch you, I'm going to pick you up? Or do you want to use it to ask the snake to do specific behaviors? Well, everyone, that's all for now. If you need to contact me about anything, here are my email addresses, websites, and you can get further learning and group chats and live discussions through my Patreon at patreon.com/behavior-education. I also do my private consultations through Patreon. Until next time, everybody, please remember to always be kind and love your animals.